You slept 8 hours last night. You didn't do anything particularly hard today. Nobody hurt you. Nothing went wrong. And yet, somewhere deep in your chest, there's this heaviness, like you've been carrying something invisible for so long you've forgotten what it felt like to put it down. You're not sick. You're not lazy. But you are so tired. And the scariest part? You have absolutely no idea why. Here's what nobody tells you about that kind of exhaustion, the kind that sleep doesn't fix, that vacations don't cure, that no amount of coffee can touch. It's not coming from your body. It's coming from somewhere much deeper than that. And once you understand what's actually draining you, everything starts to make a different kind of sense. This isn't about burnout in the traditional sense. This isn't about working too many hours or skipping rest days. The people who feel this specific kind of tired, the bone-deep, soul-level exhaustion that has no obvious cause, they're usually not lazy. They're actually some of the most thoughtful, emotionally aware, deeply feeling people you'll ever meet. And that, as it turns out, is exactly the problem. Let's start with something called emotional labor. Most people think of labor as physical, lifting things, building things, moving through the world with your body. But your mind does labor too, constantly, every single day. Every time you read a room before you walk into it, every time you adjust your personality slightly so the conversation stays comfortable, every time you swallow something you wanted to say because you didn't want to cause tension, that costs energy. Real energy. The same energy your body uses to run a mile or carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. The difference is, when you run a mile, you feel it in your legs. When you perform emotional labor all day, you just feel empty, drained, tired for no reason. And here's the thing most people completely miss: this kind of labor doesn't clock out when you leave work. It doesn't stop when you get home, close the door, and sit on your couch. Because the people who are most prone to this exhaustion carry the labor with them everywhere. They replay conversations from 3 days ago, wondering if they said something wrong. They anticipate other people's moods before those people even know what they're feeling. They absorb the emotional atmosphere of every room they walk into like a sponge, and sponges, eventually, get saturated. They can't hold anymore. That's not weakness. That's physics. There's also something psychologists call high self-monitoring. Some people move through life with very little internal filter. They say what they feel, they act how they want, and they spend very little mental energy managing how they're perceived. And then there are other people who are running a constant, background program in their minds, watching themselves from the outside, calculating how they're coming across, editing their words in real time, checking and rechecking whether they're taking up the right amount of space in a conversation. If you've never thought about this before, ask yourself, do you ever feel more tired after socializing than you did before? Not just introverted tired, but genuinely depleted, like something was taken from you? That's the cost of high self-monitoring. And most people who do it don't even realize they're doing it. It's just become background noise. Exhausting, invisible, constant background noise. But emotional labor and self-monitoring are only part of the story. Because the other thing that creates this particular kind of tired, the kind that feels like it lives in your bones, is something a little harder to name. Psychologists sometimes call it values misalignment, and it might be the most underdiagnosed source of chronic exhaustion in modern life. Here's what it means. When the life you're living on the outside doesn't match the person you are on the inside, when your days are filled with obligations, roles, and routines that don't actually reflect what you care about, your nervous system registers that as a form of stress. Not dramatic stress. Not crisis stress. Just this low, constant hum of wrongness. Like a car engine running in the wrong gear. It still moves, but everything costs more than it should. And honestly, most people never even identify this as the problem. They just know they're tired. They assume they need more sleep, more vitamins, a better morning routine. They download the productivity app. They try the cold shower. And nothing changes, because none of those things are addressing what's actually happening. The exhaustion isn't coming from how you're living. It's coming from the gap between how you're living and who you actually are. Think about the last time you did something that genuinely lit you up. Not something you were supposed to enjoy, something you actually did. Maybe it was a conversation with someone who really got you. Maybe it was a creative project you lost track of time on. Maybe it was a moment of complete stillness where, for once, your brain went quiet. Notice how that felt in your body. Notice that you weren't tired then even if you'd been exhausted an hour before. That's not a coincidence. That's your nervous system responding to alignment, to rightness. And the inverse of that, the exhaustion you feel when you're not aligned, is just as real, just as physical, even when it has no visible cause. There's one more layer to this, and it might be the one that hits the hardest. A lot of people who experience this kind of chronic, causeless exhaustion grew up in environments where their emotional needs weren't fully met. Not necessarily traumatic environments, not always. Sometimes it's just a household where emotions weren't really talked about. Where you learned, very early, that the way to be loved was to be manageable. To not need too much. To handle things. To be strong. And so you became very, very good at taking care of everyone else's feelings while quietly setting your own to the side. And you've been doing it for so long now that you don't even notice you're doing it. You just know that every interaction leaves you a little more depleted than before. You just know that you go to bed tired and wake up the same way. You just know that something is missing, even if you couldn't name it on your best day. That pattern, the one where you chronically put others first and yourself last, doesn't just create emotional exhaustion. It creates a kind of identity exhaustion. Over time, you lose touch with what you actually want, what you actually feel, what you actually need. And when you don't know those things, you can't restore yourself. You can sleep 10 hours and still feel like you haven't rested at all. Because rest isn't just about the body going still. Real rest is about the mind feeling safe enough to stop performing. And if you've never fully experienced that kind of safety, if your nervous system has been in low-grade alert mode for years, then sleep is just a pause, not a recovery. So what do you do with all of this? Here's the refrain that might actually help. Stop treating your exhaustion like a problem to be fixed and start treating it like information. Your body is telling you something. Your nervous system is waving a flag. The tiredness isn't the enemy, it's a message. And the message, usually, is something like, you've been giving too much to things that don't give back. You've been performing when you needed to rest. You've been living in someone else's version of your life, and it's costing you more than you know. Start asking different questions. Not why am I so tired, but where am I spending energy that isn't mine to spend? Not what's wrong with me, but what would it feel like to stop monitoring myself for 1 hour? Not how do I fix this, but what does my actual self need right now? Not my responsible self, not my people-pleasing self, but the part of me that existed before I learned to manage everyone else's comfort? These aren't easy questions. They don't have tidy answers. But they're the right questions. Because the exhaustion you feel, the real, deep, inexplicable kind, it's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's not ingratitude for a life that looks fine on paper. It's the accumulated weight of being someone who feels deeply, cares intensely, and has probably never been given full permission to put that weight down. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to not have a reason that makes sense to other people. You're allowed to say I'm exhausted without following it up with a justification. And you're allowed to start, slowly and imperfectly, to build a life with more room in it. Room for the version of you that doesn't have to perform. Room for rest that actually restores. Room for the quiet, unhurried, unmonitored self that's been waiting, patiently, underneath all that beautiful, exhausting effort. If this hit you somewhere you didn't expect, drop a brain in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who's always tired but can never explain why, share this with them. It might be the thing they didn't know they needed to hear. Like this video if it resonated, subscribe if you want more content that actually goes beneath the surface, and I'll see you in the next one.